All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving deep, and I mean really deep, with a top-tier consultant's mindset into a process that can literally make or break your project. We're talking about planning stakeholder engagement. And look, this isn't just about soft skills or, keeping everyone happy. No, this is about strategically, systematically architecting the entire human side of your project to guarantee success. So let's jump right in. So, let me ask you a question. What truly separates a project that soars from one that just crashes and burns? Is it the perfect schedule, the flawless budget spreadsheet? Well, more often than not, the real answer lies in the human element. The people who can either champion your work or, derail it completely. And hey, don't just take my word for it. This idea is so fundamental, it's basically gospel in the project management body of knowledge, the global standard for our profession. The guide itself tells us, point blank, that getting stakeholder engagement right isn't a nice to have. It's a core competency that can flat out determine whether you win or lose. To really get our arms around this, we're going to tackle it like a top-tier consultant would. First, we'll start with the why, the big imperative. Then we'll dissect what a good plan actually looks like. From there, we'll get into gathering our intelligence, picking the right strategic tools for the job, and finally, turning that plan into real, decisive action. It's a clear roadmap to getting this right. Okay, so let's kick things off with Section 1, the Stakeholder Engagement Imperative. Before we even think about the how, we have to be crystal clear on the why. You've got to understand, this isn't about ticking a box on a checklist. It's a strategic necessity for your project's survival and ultimately its success. So here it is, the first and probably the most critical mindset shift you need to make. Stop thinking of stakeholder satisfaction as just a happy little byproduct of a successful project. You need to elevate it. Frame it as a core project objective, every bit as important as scope, schedule, and cost. I promise you, the second you start treating stakeholder success as a key deliverable, your entire approach to planning is going to change. So what's the official definition from the PM Bouquet Guide? It calls this the process of developing approaches to involve stakeholders. Let's break that down, consultant style. Process tells us it's structured, not just random guesswork. Developing approaches means it's strategic, not accidental. And it's all based on their needs, their interests, and, this is the big one, their potential impact. In other words, this is all about proactive strategy, not reactive damage control. Okay, let's move on to Section 2. Now that we've nailed down the why, let's really look at the what. Before we can build a world-class plan, we need to know exactly what the finished product is supposed to look like. Think of this as the blueprint for every single interaction we're going to have. So what is this stakeholder engagement plan really? First off, don't think of it as some separate, standalone document. It's actually a core component baked right into your main project management plan. Its whole purpose? To lay out strategies for productive involvement. We're not just looking for involvement for its own sake. We need it to actively push the project forward. And here's something super important to remember. This thing is adaptable. For a huge infrastructure project, yeah, it might be a formal, super detailed document. But for a small internal team, it could be way more informal. The format isn't what matters. What really matters is its primary goal, to be a truly actionable guide that your team can actually use to interact with people effectively. All right, on to Section 3, fueling the planning process. Any great plan is built on a solid foundation of high-quality information, right? You just can't strategize in a vacuum. So where does all this essential intelligence come from? We're going to structure this using a classic consulting trick, grouping our inputs into 3 logical, totally distinct categories. Our information gathering is going to follow these 3 clear steps. First, we look at the project's foundation, the bedrock. Second, we gather direct intel on the stakeholders themselves. And third, we have to understand the organizational context, the rules of the game we're all playing in. This structured approach makes sure we don't miss a single crucial piece of the puzzle. First up, the project foundation. We start with a project charter. This document is our true north. It defines the whole purpose of the project and who the key players are. Then we dive into the plans that already exist. We're talking the resource plan to see who's on the team, the communications plan for how we're supposed to talk to each other, and the risk plan to see if any stakeholder-related threats have already popped up. The idea here is to build on what's already there, not to reinvent the wheel. Step 2 is all about gathering key stakeholder intelligence. The stakeholder register is like our central dossier. Who are these people and what makes them tick? But we have to go deeper than that. We need to analyze the project logs. The assumption log, for instance, can show us our blind spots about what motivates them. The issue log points to past conflicts, and the change log? That shows us who has the real juice to influence the project's direction. This is how we build a living, breathing intelligence feed. And finally, step 3, the organizational context. I want you to think about this in 2 parts. First, you have the rules of the game, which we call enterprise environmental factors. This is the company culture, the political climate, all the unwritten rules you have to follow. Then you have the tools in your toolbox, or organizational process assets. These are your templates, your policies, and maybe most important of all, the lessons learned from past projects. This is how we use history to get a leg up. And that brings us right to section 4, your strategic toolkit. So we've gathered all this fantastic intelligence. Now what do we do with it? Well, this is where the real analytical work begins. We're going to use some proven tools and techniques to transform all that raw data into a smart, powerful engagement strategy. The very first thing we have to do is prioritize strategically, because you just can't give everyone the same level of attention. For most projects, that classic power/interest grid is going to be your best friend. It helps you quickly sort people into buckets like keep satisfied or manage closely. But when you're dealing with a really complex project with tons of stakeholders, you might need something more powerful, like the salience model. It adds a critical third dimension, urgency, to help you figure out who needs your attention right now. But the real centerpiece of our toolkit, the absolute most powerful tool for this whole process, is the Stakeholder Engagement Assessment Matrix. Its function is just brilliantly simple and incredibly effective. At its core, it's a gap analysis tool. It forces us to ask 2 simple but profound questions. Where are our stakeholders right now, and where do we need them to be for this project to succeed? So, to use this matrix, we first need to understand the 5 levels of engagement. A stakeholder can be unaware. They literally don't know the project exists. They can be resistant, actively working against you. They can be neutral, just kind of watching from the sidelines. They can be supportive, which is great. They're cheering you on. Or, at the highest level, they can be leading, actively knocking down barriers for you. And here's how it looks in practice. We plot a C for a stakeholder's current engagement level and a D for their desired level. So take stakeholder 1. They're currently resistant, but we need them to be supportive. Whoa, that's a huge gap to close. Or stakeholder 2, who's completely unaware, and we need them to become supportive. And then there's stakeholder 3, who's just neutral, but we need them to become a project champion, a true leader. You see, each one of these gaps requires a totally unique strategy. So here's the absolute punchline. The entire stakeholder engagement plan we are building is designed to answer one simple question. How do we close these gaps? Every single action item, every email, every meeting should be a targeted strategy designed to move a specific stakeholder from their current C to their desired D. That right there is the very essence of strategic stakeholder engagement. And that brings us to our final section, section 5, from plan to action. Because let's be honest, even the most brilliant strategy on paper is completely worthless if it just sits in a folder on a server somewhere. This plan isn't meant to be a static document that you create and then forget about. It has to be a living, breathing guide that adapts to your project's activities. Look, this process is absolutely not a one-and-done deal. Of course, you create the initial plan at the very start, but the real work is in keeping it alive. At every single major project milestone, you have to pull out that plan and ask the tough questions. Has anything changed? Has that neutral stakeholder suddenly become resistant? Did one of our key supporters just leave the company? This plan has to be a dynamic guide constantly updated to reflect the reality on the ground. And this is exactly how the plan comes to life. The whole plan stakeholder engagement process that we've been walking through creates an output that then becomes a critical input for 2 other key processes. It feeds right into managed stakeholder engagement, that's the day-to-day work of talking and working with people. And it feeds into monitor stakeholder engagement, which is where we track our progress and tweak our strategies. See how it works? Planning drives execution, which in turn informs our monitoring. It's a continuous loop. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Your stakeholders, whether you actively manage them or just let things happen, they are going to define your project's outcome. It's a fact. Their support is the wind in your sails. Their resistance is the anchor dragging you to a halt. So the only real question left is, have you built a plan to architect their success, and by doing so, architect your own?